Maya Collins moved quietly through the hallways of Sterling Corp's private mountain estate, her rubber-soled shoes whispering across polished marble. She kept her head down her back straight and her uniform clean. It was the third day of the executive retreat and she had memorized every corridor by now. Cleaning was just a job. It paid the bills. It kept the lights on at home and bought medication for her grandfather. That was all that mattered. She entered the grand lounge to vacuum around the fireplace before the executives returned from dinner. The room, massive and tastefully decorated, reeked of expensive leather old money and unspoken hierarchies. Maya had learned long ago to be invisible in such places. But tonight someone noticed her. At the bar, Billionaire CEO Grant Sterling leaned back in his chair, a glass of scotch dangling between two fingers. His friends, all dressed in tailored suits, surrounded him in a loose half circle. They were laughing about something, probably stock numbers or golf bets. Maya ignored them and began cleaning. Then Grant's voice rang out. "Hey, is that the same girl from yesterday? The one who spilled coffee near the elevator?" Maya froze for a fraction of a second but said nothing. She kept moving. His friend laughed. "Man, look at her. Still scrubbing floors like it's 1950. Grant smirked. "Bet I can get her to run out of here in 30 seconds flat." "You serious? Watch this." Maya felt him approach before she heard his footsteps. The room seemed to go still, the laughter now quiet, watching. She straightened up slowly. "Excuse me, sir," she said, trying to step aside. Grant stood in front of her too close. His smile was wide, charming to most, but to her, it felt like a trap. "No need to run off, sweetheart," he said. "Just wanted to know what kind of badge you wear under that uniform." "Are you military, or just pretending to be tough?" She said nothing, eyes steady. He reached for her cleaning strap and in one motion, too fast to stop, tugged down the top half of her jumpsuit, exposing her back. Gasps erupted. A few laughs, but then silence. Grant stepped back, his face paling. Across Maya's spine in bold ink was a military tattoo. Not decorative, not casual. It was the crest of an elite special forces unit, rare, sacred, feared. Known only among the highest-ranking military circles. Grant's voice cracked. "What the hell?" Maya's arms trembled, not from shame, but from the restraint it took not to slap him across the face. She pulled up her uniform with slow, precise hands. Her eyes met his. "You think power means you can strip someone in front of a crowd? My father fought for this country, died for it, and you use your power to humiliate the people who clean your floors." She turned and walked out of the lounge. Not a single executive dared stop her. In the hallway, she passed a mirror and paused. The tattoo was old, faded. It had been her father's before it was hers. She had it inked on her spine after his funeral, the only permanent mark of the man who had shaped her life. Colonel Harris Collins, the Ghost Division. She breathed deeply, then walked on. Back in the lounge, Grant remained frozen. His friend finally broke the silence. "Dude, that symbol, isn't that the one from—" Grant didn't answer. His mind was already racing, because suddenly he remembered the words his father once told him as a boy, pointing to a photo of a soldier with the same tattoo. "If you ever see this mark, Grant, show respect. That man saved my life. Men like him don't brag, they just carry the weight." Grant had just stripped the daughter of one of those men in front of his entire company, and she had walked away with more dignity than he could ever buy. Grant Sterling sat alone in his suite, the scotch untouched on the side table. Outside, the mountains were dark silhouettes against a cold sky, but inside, his thoughts moved even darker. The laughter had stopped hours ago, but the shame lingered. He had humiliated a woman, a cleaning lady, just for a joke. That alone should have made him feel something. But it was the tattoo that wouldn't let him sleep. He had seen that mark before. Not in passing, not online, but in a framed photo that hung in his father's study. A young soldier with intense eyes and that same ink running down his back like a quiet badge of sacrifice. Ghost Division. A unit never mentioned in press releases but whispered about in military circles. Highly trained, deeply secretive, and rarely surviving their missions. His father, Walter Sterling, had once said, "If it weren't for a man from that unit, you wouldn't even be here." Now that symbol was on the back of the woman he had mocked. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Colonel Dwyer, came the gruff voice on the other end. "It's Grant Sterling." A pause. "Well, I'll be damned. You only call when you've stepped in something deep." Grant didn't waste time. "I saw a tattoo tonight. A Ghost Division crest. On a woman's back." There was silence. Then the sound of shifting papers. "Go on." Cleaning staff. Late 20s. Brown skin, sharp eyes. "Her name's Maya Collins." Another pause. "Collins? You sure?" "Yes. That's Harris Collins's daughter." Grant sat up straighter. "You knew him. I served with him. That man was a legend. Saved more lives than I could count and never asked for a single favor. Last I heard, his daughter disappeared after his funeral. Dropped out of college. Rumor said she was working under a different name." Grant's voice was low. "She's working for me. You don't deserve her." The words hit hard. "I know," Grant said quietly. "I messed up." She ever talk about her father? No. She didn't talk at all. Not until she looked me in the eye and walked out like she owned the room. Dwyer's voice softened just slightly. "Then maybe she's still got his spine." After the call ended, Grant sat for a long while, the weight of the moment pressing hard on his chest. He opened his laptop and pulled up the company employee database. Searched Maya Collins. Her file was bare, just basic HR details. No emergency contact, no educational background, just a note requested night shift due to caregiving responsibilities. He called HR next. "Who interviewed Maya Collins?" A nervous voice replied. "She came through a subcontractor. Temporary staff, we barely ran a check." "Find me everything you can. And don't alert her." "Not yet." By the next morning, a file landed on his desk. He read every page twice. Her father, Colonel Harris Collins, Medal of Honor. Killed in service 6 years ago. No pension claims from the family. Her scholarship offers withdrawn after her father's death. Took work as a waitress, janitor, even construction assistant. Currently caring for her grandfather, a stroke patient. No criminal record, no social media, no demands. Just quiet survival. Grant leaned back in his chair, feeling the bitter weight of irony. He had thrown money at celebrities for fake endorsements. Paid influencers 6 figures to pretend they liked his champagne brand. But the woman with the real story, the daughter of a hero, was scrubbing his floor while he laughed. He rose from his desk and grabbed his keys. Across the city, Maya stood outside the pharmacy with a paper bag of medications. She checked her balance on her phone, lips pressed tight. It would be tight this month again. She was used to tight. When she got home, her grandfather sat in his chair staring at the turned-off television. He looked up as she entered, eyes brightening a little. "Everything okay, Maya?" he asked. She kissed his forehead. "Just another day." But her hands shook slightly as she unpacked the bag, not from fear, but from the burning memory of what had happened. She had been humiliated in front of dozens of people. But what haunted her more was that Grant Sterling had recognized the tattoo. She had seen it in his eyes, that flicker of shock. And something else. Recognition. She didn't want his apology. She didn't want pity. But part of her wanted to know, why had he looked at her like that? And what would he do now that he knew the truth? Rain tapped against the window pane as Maya sat beside her grandfather's chair, slowly spooning soup into his trembling hands. The old man, once a strong, towering figure in her life, now needed help to button his shirt. Yet his eyes, clouded with age, still held the warmth and quiet steel of the man who had raised her. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She offered a small smile. "Just thinking about work." He chuckled softly. Back in my day, thinking about work meant you were about to quit or punch your boss. Maya shook her head. It's not that simple. He studied her carefully. Did someone cross a line again? Her silence answered for her. The truth was she hadn't told him what happened at the retreat. Not the prank, not the crowd, not the humiliation. She had hidden the bruised emotion behind her smile, but inside something had cracked. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. You carry your father's strength, Maya. But even he knew when to fight back. She nodded faintly, then rose to clear the table. As she washed the dishes, her thoughts kept returning to Grant Sterling, his face when he saw the tattoo, the stillness, the silence. It wasn't the reaction of a man pleased with his cruelty. It was the look of someone who had just seen a ghost. She didn't expect to see him again, and she didn't care. So when a knock echoed at the door just past 9 that evening, she was not prepared. Peering through the peephole, her stomach sank. It was him. She opened the door halfway, her voice tight. What do you want? Grant stood there dressed in a rain-dampened coat, no entourage, no arrogance in sight. I wanted to apologize, he said. Properly. Not in a press release, not through a lawyer. I don't want your apology, she said, starting to close the door. He held up something, an old photograph. Her hand paused. This is my father, he said. With yours. Afghanistan. 1999. She looked closer. Her breath caught. There they were, 2 younger versions of the men she knew only through memory and stories. Harris Collins stood in uniform, arm around a man in civilian gear, Walter Sterling. My father told me that if I ever came across someone bearing the Ghost Division mark, I was to treat them with respect, Grant said. He said your father saved his life. Maya's fingers tightened on the doorknob. I didn't know, he said quietly. I didn't know who you were. Her jaw clenched. And if I hadn't had that tattoo, would I just be another poor girl you laughed at and discarded? Grant flinched. No. I mean, maybe. I don't know. But I know I was wrong. And I want to make it right. You can't, please, he said. Let me try. She stepped out onto the porch, shutting the door behind her. I work to feed my grandfather. I clean because it's the only job that let me take care of him. I didn't ask for your attention. I never wanted it. I know, he said. But I see now that I owe you more than an apology. My father owed your father his life. I owe you my respect. For a moment, the rain fell between them like a curtain. Then Maya's voice broke through it, low but unwavering. Respect doesn't come in words. It comes in action. She turned and walked back inside, shutting the door softly. Grant stood in silence for a moment before leaving the porch. He hadn't expected forgiveness, but something in her eyes told him the door wasn't fully closed. It was just waiting to see what he would do next. Back inside, her grandfather looked up from the chair. Who was that? She exhaled slowly. The man who thinks he can fix what he broke. Her grandfather smiled faintly. Then, make him work for it. Later that night, Maya sat by the window, her father's medal clutched in her hand. She had worn the tattoo on her back to carry his memory, to remind herself never to bow. But now it had forced a powerful man to look in the mirror. And maybe that was the beginning of something she never expected. Not pity, not revenge, but a reckoning. At Sterling Corp's downtown headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers moved like wildfire through the halls. Something had happened at the retreat, something serious. Employees who had always moved in silence now glanced up from their screens when Grant Sterling passed by, eyes full of quiet judgment. The board had called an emergency meeting. Damage control barked Robert Malden, the oldest and most vocal of the board members. We need it now. Rumors are already spreading. Grant sat at the head of the long table, fingers steepled, face unreadable. I'm aware of the situation. You publicly stripped an employee, Grant Malden said, jabbing the table. Whether it was a joke or not, that's harassment. and the press hasn't even picked it up yet. But when they do, it won't go public, Grant cut in. And what if it does? A younger board member asked. You humiliated a woman. If she goes to the media, she won't. How do you know? Grant looked up slowly. Because she's not interested in money or revenge. That silenced the room for a moment. Malden leaned forward. Then we buy her silence. Settle quietly. Offer compensation, NDA, the usual package. No, Grant said. Everyone stared. What do you mean no? Malden frowned. I said no. Grant's voice was calm but final. I'm not paying her to disappear. I'm going to face it. Malden scoffed. This company doesn't survive scandals by growing a conscience. This company wouldn't exist if her father hadn't saved mine, Grant said sharply. That shut him up. Later in his private office, Grant stood by the window watching the city's lights flicker, like restless thoughts. He felt out of place in his own skin, like the polished suit, the cold titles, the empire. None of it fit anymore. Not after looking into Maya's eyes. He reached into his drawer and pulled out the thin file he had ordered on her. No criminal record, a spotless work history, rejected scholarship applications, deferred college acceptance. But there at the bottom was something that stayed with him. Requested night shift for caregiver responsibilities. Declined management training to remain part-time. He stared at the words. She gave up her career to care for someone, and I gave up my soul to build one. Across the city, Maya arrived at a small neighborhood cafe requested by a veterans group for a private meeting. She had ignored them for weeks, but today she agreed to come. The man waiting for her was in his 50s, wearing a veteran's cap and a kind expression. His name was Marcus Doyle, a retired Army medic. He slid a small photo across the table. You probably don't remember me, but I served under your father. Ghost Division. He saved my life outside Kandahar. Maya blinked at the photo. Her father, younger than she remembered, was smiling faintly beside Marcus and two other men, dust on their boots. Fire in their eyes. Word's gotten around, Marcus continued. About what happened with the Sterling boy? You've made some of us proud just by standing tall. I didn't do anything special, Maya said quietly. You carried your father's name with dignity. That's enough. She pushed the photo back toward him. I don't want a spotlight. Or a scandal. Marcus nodded. Then we won't push it. But you should know you're not alone. That night when she got home, she found a plain envelope taped to her door. No name. Just the Sterling Corp logo. Inside was a letter from HR Ms. Collins. Please accept this preliminary offer of settlement in response to recent events. The company acknowledges your distress and wishes to resolve matters with confidentiality. Enclosed financial compensation, medical coverage, and NDA documentation. There was no signature, no apology, just business. Maya stared at the check amount. It was enough to pay her grandfather's medical bills for 5 years, maybe more. But the bile rose in her throat. The next morning, she walked into the Sterling Corp building and headed straight for the HR floor. No appointment, no hesitation. The secretary's eyes widened when she saw her. I'm here to return this, Maya said, dropping the envelope on the desk. Tell them I don't sell my silence. Ms. Collins. Are you sure I'm not for sale? She said. Tell Grant Sterling that if he wants to fix what he broke, he'll have to show up himself. As she walked out of the building, dozens of employees watched her pass. Not the cleaning lady today, but the daughter of a soldier, and the woman who wouldn't bow. The announcement came unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning. All Sterling Corp employees, executives, assistants, maintenance workers, cafeteria staff were called to the central atrium for a company-wide address. No reason given, no agenda shared. By noon, the space buzzed with whispers and speculation. The atrium, known for hosting quarterly announcements and award ceremonies, had never been this packed. Some thought it was a product launch, others feared layoffs. But when Grant Sterling stepped up onto the small stage without a script, flanked by no board members, wearing a simple charcoal suit, with no tie, Silence fell. He stood still for a few seconds, scanning the room. And then he spoke. "A few days ago, I made a mistake. No preamble, no polished words. I thought it was a joke. I thought my power gave me license to laugh at someone who wasn't laughing. I disrespected a member of this company, not in private, not in passing, but publicly. I humiliated her. And worse, I did it without even knowing who she was." Maya stood near the back of the crowd, wearing her cleaning uniform as she always did. A few co-workers had nudged her when he began speaking. She hadn't planned to come, but something in her gut told her she needed to witness it. "She wasn't just an employee," Grant continued. "She's the daughter of Colonel Harris Collins, one of this country's greatest military heroes, a man who saved lives in silence and whose legacy I defiled with ignorance." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some looked around. Others searched the room for Maya. She didn't move. "I came from privilege," he said. "I was handed power and told to lead. But I led with ego, and it took the strength of one person, one woman, to show me the truth." He paused, eyes landing on Maya. "Maya Collins, I owe you more than an apology, but I'll start there." He turned to face the entire room again. "I am sorry." There was no applause, no dramatic music, just a heavy silence. Then Grant held up a document in his hand. "This is a proposed settlement agreement my board wanted to offer Ms. Collins. Money benefits and a non-disclosure clause. A way to make this go away." He ripped the papers in half. "She deserves more than hush money. She deserves respect." A murmur passed through the room. For once, even his harshest critics said nothing. "I will be stepping down temporarily as CEO to reform internal leadership policies beginning with worker protections. No one at Sterling Corp will ever be silenced again." He stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward Maya, who stood still, arms folded. The crowd parted like a wave. When he stopped in front of her, the entire atrium held its breath. "I know you don't want a stage," he said quietly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But you have one, Maya. Whether you like it or not. You changed something here." Maya looked him in the eye. "This isn't about me. It started with you," he said. "And I'll make sure it doesn't end with another woman cleaning up behind men who think they're untouchable." She hesitated, then nodded once. Not approval, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. He turned to walk away, but her voice stopped him. "Mr. Sterling." He turned back. "You can't buy back dignity," she said. "You earn it." And with that, she turned and walked away, past the cameras, past the shocked faces, past the money that once tried to bury her story. She returned to her cart, her mop, her bucket. But she walked taller. Later that afternoon, Grant's press team fielded dozens of media calls. Clips of the speech had gone viral. A billionaire CEO publicly apologizing, rejecting hush money, acknowledging his own abuse of power. It made headlines. But Maya refused every interview request. Instead, she went home, boiled tea for her grandfather, and read him the newspaper's front page aloud. "That your name?" he asked with a smile. She smirked. "I guess it is." He nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud." That night, Maya placed her father's old medal back in its wooden box. For the first time in years, her hands didn't tremble. And somewhere across the city, a man who had once mocked her sat alone in his office. No crown, no empire, just a broken man beginning to understand what real power meant. The Sterling estate had once symbolized success for Grant. A sprawling mansion with manicured lawns, sweeping marble staircases, and rooms filled with cold art and colder silences. But that morning it felt different. Smaller somehow, less impressive. Grant sat in his father's old study, a room he had avoided for years. Dust floated in streaks of sunlight through the tall windows. On the wall still hung a framed black and white photo, Colonel Harris Collins shaking hands with Walter Sterling, both men younger, weary, but alive. Grant reached for the bottom drawer and pulled out an old cigar box filled with things his father had kept from the war. Inside were faded letters, a compass, a cracked watch, and a photograph of Maya as a little girl, sitting on her father's shoulders. On the back in blocky handwriting, "My reason for surviving." He stared at the photo for a long time, then quietly closed the box. He had made a mistake. A terrible, public, humiliating one. And while he had apologized, it didn't erase the weight of it. But something Maya said had stayed with him. Respect doesn't come in words. It comes in action. So he got to work. That week he called in his executive team not to delegate, but to inform. "We're overhauling how this company treats its lowest paid workers," he told them. Starting with fair wages, health care coverage for part-time staff, and direct access to report abuse without retaliation. One exec laughed. "That's not the Sterling way." "It is now," Grant replied. Some resisted, some resigned. Grant let them go. He hired a new ethics officer, an older woman named Diane Parker, formerly head of compliance for a veterans medical group. She had a sharp mind and sharper questions. He gave her full authority. Next, he created a scholarship fund. Not in his name, but in Harris Collins. It would be offered to the children of custodial workers, maintenance staff, cafeteria employees, people often unseen. He didn't tell Maya. He didn't need to. This wasn't for recognition. It was repayment. Meanwhile, Maya was still showing up at her shifts, though now she worked days and only 3 times a week. She'd quietly asked for reduced hours to take her grandfather to more doctor visits. Her co-workers treated her differently now, some with admiration, others with awkward guilt. But Maya never bragged. She mopped the floors like she always had, headphones and eyes focused. One afternoon, as she finished wiping down the glass elevators, the receptionist called her over. "There's someone asking to see you. Says he's a friend of your grandfather's." Curious, she walked toward the lobby and stopped when she saw him. Grant Sterling stood there, not in a suit, but in jeans and a plain jacket. And next to him in a wheelchair was her grandfather. "Hope you don't mind," Grant said softly. "He invited me to lunch." Maya's eyes narrowed. "You took him out of the house. Just around the park," her grandfather said, grinning. "I needed some air. This one even pushed me himself. Imagine that billionaire chauffeur." She blinked, stunned. Why her grandfather spoke before Grant could. "Because he asked about your father." And I told him the story. Maya led them to a break room and brewed tea while they talked. Grant sat beside her grandfather, listening carefully as the old man recounted stories of Harris Collins, the missions, the sacrifices, the day he carried Walter Sterling on his back through a burning convoy. "Your father owed us," the old man said quietly. "Now you do." Grant nodded. "That's why I'm here." Later, as they stepped outside, Grant turned to Maya. "I know you're still angry," he said. "You should be. I deserve it." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "What are you trying to prove? That I can be better?" She studied him, searching for the familiar smugness, but found none. "Then stop trying to impress me. Impress yourself." With that, she walked away. That night, Grant sat in his apartment reviewing old Sterling Foundation records. His eyes froze when he saw her name, Maya Collins, on a list of scholarship applicants from 6 years ago. It had been rejected due to insufficient documentation following the death of a guardian. She had once wanted to go to law school. She had given it up to care for family. The next morning, he made a call. Find a way to reinstate the application, and do it quietly. Not because he wanted gratitude, but because she deserved a chance to chase her dreams again. The envelope arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon, tucked between bills and advertisements on Maya's worn doormat. She picked it up absently while juggling groceries and unlocking the door with one hand. It was plain, unmarked, except for the return address in the top corner, Midtown School of Law. Her breath caught. She hadn't applied there in years. Not since she withdrew her college application after her father's funeral. Not since she took on the role of caregiver provider and silent fighter. She tore it open, hands trembling. Inside was a single-page letter, polite, formal. But beneath the professional tone were the words that made her knees weak. "Congratulations, Ms. Collins. You have been accepted into our deferred program on full scholarship. Orientation begins this fall." She read it again and again, trying to understand, trying to believe. "Grandpa," she whispered, running into the small living room where he sat by the window, his eyes following the gray sky. She held up the letter. "I got in." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled slowly. "Of course you did. But I didn't apply. Then someone did it for you." She didn't need to guess who. The next morning, she found herself standing in front of the Sterling Foundation headquarters. The building was sleek and modern, its glass walls reflecting a sky she hadn't noticed in years. She didn't have an appointment, she didn't call ahead, she just walked in. The receptionist blinked in surprise, but quickly recovered. "Ms. Collins, yes, I need to speak to Grant Sterling." "Of course. One moment." 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Grant stepped out. He looked tired, but lighter somehow, as if the sharp edges had dulled in him. He didn't smile, didn't smirk, just waited. "You did this?" Maya said, holding up the letter. "I helped," he said. "The scholarship was already in your file. It just got lost." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. "Because I saw what you gave up," he finally said. "Because you sacrificed for everyone but yourself. Because the world owes you more than I ever could. And because I want you to have what you deserve." Maya took a breath. The air felt different now, less heavy. "I'm not going to thank you," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm not forgiving you. You don't have to." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her bag. "I'm going," she said, "to law school. I'll finish it. For my father, for me." He nodded. "Good. But don't think this makes us even." He met her gaze. "I don't. I hope we never are." She paused, caught off guard. "Why?" "Because if we were even," he said quietly, "that would mean I'd have to carry what you have. And I'm not sure I could." She said nothing, but her eyes softened, just slightly. That evening after her shift, Maya returned to the old mansion, the retreat site, just once. It was closed now under renovation. The grand lounge was empty, the place where everything had changed forever. She stood in the quiet room and slowly removed a small wooden box from her coat. Inside was her father's medal. She placed it gently on the marble mantel. Not as an offering, not as a gift. As a mark, a sign that her story didn't end here, but his still mattered. The next morning, Grant found the box waiting at the office entrance. No note, no name, just the medal and a folded photo of Colonel Collins. He sat with it in his hands for hours. That night he opened a blank journal and wrote one sentence: "You don't buy back respect, you earn it." And he knew he was just beginning. The Sterling Corp of yesterday was fading. Its sterile boardrooms, rigid hierarchies, and silence for sale policies were being dismantled piece by piece. Employees no longer whispered when they passed executives in the halls. They spoke. They asked questions. They demanded fairness. And for once, someone listened. Grant Sterling had become that someone. It wasn't easy. The resistance was strong, especially from the old guard who saw change as weakness. Robert Malden and 2 other board members had resigned after the 3rd meeting on ethical restructuring. "You're destroying our legacy," Malden warned as he walked out. "I'm rebuilding it," Grant replied. He spent mornings reviewing worker complaints, afternoons speaking with shift managers, and evenings drafting policies. He met with janitors, cafeteria staff, receptionists, people he had never spoken to before. Not for show, for learning. One cafeteria worker told him, "It's the first time anyone in a suit's asked me what my name is." He wrote it down. He was keeping a journal now. Quiet entries, honest ones. Outside of work, he had started volunteering with a veterans group that supported families of fallen soldiers. It was there he met a woman who had once trained beside Harris Collins. She told Grant, "Your father bragged about his empire. Harris never bragged about anything. But we all followed him. That stayed with him." A few weeks later, Maya's grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was small, quiet, held at a modest chapel on the east side of the city. Maya stood alone beside the casket. No tears, just a stillness that felt heavier than grief. After the service, as guests filed out, she turned and saw him. Grant stood near the back, out of sight from most, not in a suit, not making a scene, just there. She walked up to him. "You didn't have to come. I wanted to." She looked at him carefully. "Did you know him well? No. But I wanted to. He was the kind of man I needed to meet 10 years ago." Maya looked down at her shoes. "He never hated you. That's generous of him." She hesitated, then said, "He said you were trying. That doesn't make me worthy." "No," she said quietly, "but it makes you human." Grant left before the reception, slipping out without saying goodbye. He didn't want credit for showing up. He just wanted to be present. In the weeks that followed, the Sterling Foundation officially launched the Colonel Harris Collins Fellowship, a fully funded initiative to support first-generation college students from blue-collar families. Maya's name was deliberately omitted from the press release. Her wish, not his. He continued working behind the scenes, pushed forward policy changes, cut extravagant executive bonuses, and redistributed them into employee housing stipends and education grants. A journalist from the Wall Street Post requested an interview. He declined. This wasn't about headlines anymore. At night, he still wrote in his journal, "I was raised to build power, but now I see real power is knowing when to kneel, when to listen, when to stand alone for someone who never had a voice." One evening, he visited the old family study again. This time, he brought a hammer. He took down the portrait of Walter Sterling, the man the world celebrated, but who never taught his son the value of humility. He replaced it with the photo Maya had left him, Colonel Harris Collins, smiling in the sun. The man who had saved his family, and the daughter who had saved him from himself. That was the legacy he wanted now. A soft autumn wind stirred the red and gold leaves on the lawn outside Midtown School of Law. On the stage beneath the white graduation canopy, rows of students in navy robes waited. Smiles stretched wide, mortarboards balanced precariously on their heads. Among them sat Maya Collins. She held her hands folded tightly in her lap. Not out of nervousness, but because she needed to feel the moment. To believe it was real. 3 years ago, she was mopping floors and folding discount grocery receipts into origami birds to distract herself from hopelessness. Today, her name was printed on a program beside the words, "With distinction." She hadn't told anyone she was graduating. Not the press. Not her former co-workers. Not even Grant. This was hers. Still, she couldn't help but look toward the crowd when they called her name. And there, seated in the back row, wearing a quiet smile and no tie, was the man who had once destroyed her dignity and then spent years rebuilding his own. He rose as she walked across the stage, clapping once, twice, then stopping. That was enough. After the ceremony, she wandered through the crowd alone. Her classmates were gathering for pictures, hugs, and champagne. She kept to the edges. And then he was beside her. "You didn't tell me," Grant said. "I didn't need to," she replied. He handed her a small, unwrapped gift. Inside the box was a fountain pen. On the side, engraved in cursive, were 6 simple words. "Justice begins with those who remember." She held it for a moment. "You didn't write this." "No," he admitted. "It's something your father once told mine." Her fingers closed around the pen. Fitting. They walked in silence for a few steps. "I heard the Collins Foundation is helping over 100 students this year," Maya said. "Mostly thanks to a few anonymous donors." She arched a brow. "Anonymous? Some reputations are better rebuilt quietly." She nodded. "And Sterling Corp leaner, calmer, more accountable. Still yours partly." "I stepped down as CEO permanently," he said. "Now I serve on the foundation's board and teach 1 class a semester. Leadership ethics. Maya smiled faintly. Do your students know who you were? I tell them a story, he replied, about a man who mistook power for worth and a woman who reminded him what real courage looks like. They stopped at the edge of the lawn. I'm joining the State Workers' Justice Program, Maya said. Pro bono work, labor violations, representation for people without a voice. His face lit up not with pride, but with peace. You'll change lives. I hope to. She turned to face him fully. You're not who you were. I hope not. She studied him for a long beat. My father believed that dignity wasn't about never falling, she said. It was about how you stand up after. I stood up because of you, Grant replied. They said nothing more. There was no need, no dramatic music, no romantic gesture, just mutual understanding between two people who had collided, fractured, and grown into something better because of it. She extended her hand. He took it, not as a truce, but as a recognition. They walked together toward the parking lot. Not lovers, not enemies, just two lives that had changed each other. Forever. 5 years later, the city was different. Or maybe it was just Maya who had changed. The skyline still stretched into the clouds, traffic still snarled every morning, and the wealthy still sipped espresso in glass towers. But in the small corners of the city, the legal aid clinics, the labor hearings, the break rooms, where custodians gathered to rest tired feet, something new had taken root. Hope. Maya stood outside a community justice center bearing a simple brass plaque, the Harris Collins Legal Fellowship Office, founded in memory, run in purpose. Inside, half a dozen law students and junior advocates worked at mismatched desks, talking softly over files and coffee. They took on wage theft cases, housing disputes, medical denial appeals. All the cases other firms ignored. Today, Maya was interviewing a new client, a single mother named Carla, who had lost her job after refusing to work overtime without pay. She sat across from her, hands wringing nervously. You have rights, Maya said gently. We're going to fight this. Carla's voice cracked. Why would someone like you care about someone like me? Maya smiled faintly. Because I used to be you. She handed her a form and explained the next steps with the calm precision of someone who had lived the struggle, not studied it from afar. After the client left, Maya stepped into her office. The walls were lined with framed photos, her graduating class, her grandfather, a black and white portrait of her father, and in the center above her desk hung a faded military patch, the Ghost Division emblem. A knock came at the door. It was Diane Parker, the now retired ethics officer who had once worked alongside Grant Sterling to reform Sterling Corp. She walked in with 2 cups of tea. They're naming a new policy at Sterling after you, Diane said, setting the tea down. The Collins Clause mandatory dignity and grievance training for all senior staff. Maya raised a brow. Not necessary. That's why they're doing it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind shared by women who had fought long battles and still found the strength to keep going. Later that evening, as Maya closed up the office, she noticed an envelope tucked into the mail slot. No address, just her name. Inside was a letter in Grant Sterling's handwriting. Maya, I thought about writing you a dozen times, maybe more, but I didn't want to interrupt your life again. I just wanted you to know that I'm still trying, every day. I don't speak for anyone anymore. I listen, I teach, I serve. You once told me that respect comes in action. I carry that with me. The world thinks we change with press conferences and grand speeches. But I learned the real change starts when no one is watching. Thank you for showing me that. I hope wherever you are, you're proud of who you've become. Because I am. Maya folded the letter slowly and placed it in a drawer beside her father's medal. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She turned off the lights and stepped outside, locking the office behind her. The night air was cool, and the streets hummed with quiet movement. Somewhere in the city, Another woman was finishing a double shift. Another man was wondering if his boss would ever see him as more than a number. And maybe somewhere else, someone like Grant was learning how to begin again. Maya walked on spine, straight eyes forward. Not toward revenge, not toward forgiveness, but toward purpose. She was no longer the cleaning lady with the scarred pride and the inked spine. She was the legacy of a soldier, the voice of the voiceless, the proof that dignity once stripped can still be reclaimed and multiplied. And as the city lights flickered like tiny torches in the dark, Maya Collins knew this. She didn't just survive. She became the reason others would rise.